rub, rub.
Assassination, assassination. Assassinate, assassinate.
Ego, ego.
Accommodate, accommodate. Accommodation, accommodation. Hemisphere, hemisphere. Ramp, ramp. Whim, whim. Whimsical, whimsical.
Mop, mop.
Warrior, warrior. Array, array. Game, game. Flush, flush. Plural, plural. First hand, first hand. Second hand, second hand. Workload, workload. Privilege, privilege. Ventilation, ventilation. Ventilate, ventilate. Vent, vent. Charter, charter. Abundant, abundant. Abound, abound. Abundance, abundance. Whereas, whereas. Pest, pest.
Discharge, discharge.
Starvation, starvation. Starve, starve.
Jag, jag. Jagged, jagged. Multiply, multiply.
Multitude, multitude. Multiple, multiple. Multiplicity, multiplicity. Preview, preview. Preside, preside. Prejudice, prejudice. Prevail, prevail. Prevalent, prevalent. Preface, preface.
Rub oneself down. Rub oneself down. Rub silver with a cloth. Rub silver with a cloth. Rub one's hands. Rub one's hands. Rub one's hands together. Rub one's hands together. Rub noses. Rub noses. Rub sleep out of one's eyes. Rub sleep out of one's eyes. Give a thing a rub. Give a thing a rub. The rubs and worries of life. The rubs and worries of life. Rub a copy. Rub a copy. Rub laundry. Rub laundry. Rub with oil. Rub with oil. Rub something lightly. Rub something lightly. Rub out the blackboard. Rub out the blackboard. Rub one's chin. Rub one's chin. Stroke one's chin. Stroke one's chin. Plot an assassination. Plot an assassination. Attempt an assassination. Attempt an assassination. Carry out an assassination. Carry out an assassination. Fail an assassination plot. Fail an assassination plot. An assassination conspiracy. An assassination conspiracy. The president's assassination. The president's assassination. Character assassination. Character assassination. Assassination of key figures. Assassination of key figures. Assassination by knife thrusts. Assassination by knife thrusts. A piece of character assassination. A piece of character assassination. Assassinate the president. Assassinate the president. Plan to assassinate somebody. Plan to assassinate somebody. A plot to assassinate the president. A plot to assassinate the president. Ego trip. Ego trip. Absolute ego. Absolute ego. Pure ego. Pure ego. Emancipation of ego. Emancipation of ego. A bruised ego. A bruised ego. Have a strong ego. Have a strong ego. An enormous ego. An enormous ego. Boost somebody's ego. Boost somebody's ego. Flatter somebody's ego. Flatter somebody's ego. Bruise somebody's ego. Bruise somebody's ego. Deflate somebody's ego. Deflate somebody's ego. Develop our ego. Develop our ego. Accommodate a friend. Accommodate a friend. Accommodate a friend with money. Accommodate a friend with money. Accommodate oneself to new surroundings. Accommodate oneself to new surroundings. Accommodate facts to theory. Accommodate facts to theory. Accommodate a friend with a night's lodging. Accommodate a friend with a night's lodging. Accommodate differences. Accommodate differences. Give accommodation. Give accommodation. Furnished accommodation. Furnished accommodation. Sleeping accommodation. Sleeping accommodation.
Accommodation facilities. Accommodation facilities. Accommodation of difference. Accommodation of difference. Come to an accommodation. Come to an accommodation. Make an accommodation. Make an accommodation. Seek an accommodation. Seek an accommodation. For your accommodation. For your accommodation. Overnight accommodation. Overnight accommodation. Self-contained accommodation. Self-contained accommodation. Self-catering accommodation. Self-catering accommodation. To stay in high-class accommodation. To stay in high-class accommodation. Reach an accommodation. Reach an accommodation. Come to an accommodation. Come to an accommodation. Improvement in accommodation. Improvement in accommodation. The Northern Hemisphere. The Northern Hemisphere. The Southern Hemisphere. The Southern Hemisphere. Cerebral Hemisphere. Cerebral Hemisphere. A freeway exit ramp. A freeway exit ramp. Entry ramp. Entry ramp. A loading ramp. A loading ramp. Boarding ramp. Boarding ramp. Escape ramp. Escape ramp. Escape route. Escape route. Go up a ramp. Go up a ramp. Go down a ramp. Go down a ramp. Have a whim. Have a whim. Pursue a whim. Pursue a whim. An idle whim. An idle whim. A sudden whim. A sudden whim. Satisfy a whim. Satisfy a whim. Take a whim for reading. Take a whim for reading. Have a whim for reading. Have a whim for reading. Indulge a whim. Indulge a whim. Whimsical inventions. Whimsical inventions. Whimsical views. Whimsical views. To have a whimsical sense of humor. To have a whimsical sense of humor. A whimsical theory. A whimsical theory. A whimsical idea. A whimsical idea. In his whimsical way. In his whimsical way. A mop and bucket. A mop and bucket. Dry mop. Dry mop. A mop of hair. A mop of hair. A mop of curly red hair. A mop of curly red hair. Mop the floor. Mop the floor. Mop one's face with a handkerchief. Mop one's face with a handkerchief. Mop up stragglers. Mop up stragglers. A gallant warrior. A gallant warrior. Old warrior. Old warrior. Unknown warrior. Unknown warrior. A warrior nation. A warrior nation. An indomitable warrior. An indomitable warrior. Battle array. Battle array. Bridal array. Bridal array. An array of cars. An array of cars. A vast array. A vast array. A dazzling array of talent. A dazzling array of talent. An array of actors. An array of actors. A whole array of proofs. A whole array of proofs.
A window array. A window array. In battle array. In battle array. Set in array. Set in array. Be in fine array. Be in fine array. Array oneself in rich clothes. Array oneself in rich clothes. Array troops for battle. Array troops for battle. Array against the enemy. Array against the enemy. Soldiers arrayed in order of battle. Soldiers arrayed in order of battle. A game of ball. A game of ball. Toys and games. Toys and games. Athletic games. Athletic games. A called game. A called game. A draw game. A draw game. No game. No game. A rubber of 3 games. A rubber of 3 games. Give a person a game. Give a person a game. Have the game in one's hands. Have the game in one's hands. Play a good game. Play a good game. Block a person's game. Block a person's game. A game not worth the candle. A game not worth the candle. The newspaper game. The newspaper game. An advertising game. An advertising game. The game of politics. The game of politics. Play a dangerous game. Play a dangerous game. The same old game. The same old game. Play a waiting game. Play a waiting game. Play a deep game. Play a deep game. Play a double game. Play a double game. Speak in game. Speak in game. Winged game. Winged game. Eat game. Eat game. Fair game. Fair game. Forbidden game. Forbidden game. Be game for anything. Be game for anything. Be game to do anything. Be game to do anything. A game fighter. A game fighter. Flush a drain. Flush a drain. Flush the pan by pulling the rope. Flush the pan by pulling the rope. Be flushed with wine. Be flushed with wine. In the full flush of triumph. In the full flush of triumph. The flush of grass. The flush of grass. The first flush of youth. The first flush of youth. In the very flush of life. In the very flush of life.
The flush of dawn. The flush of dawn. Be flush of money. Be flush of money. Be very flush with money. Be very flush with money. Flush times. Flush times. Windows flush with the wall. Windows flush with the wall. A flush deck. A flush deck. Flush deeply. Flush deeply. Flush toilet. Flush toilet. Flush the toilet. Flush the toilet. Flush tank. Flush tank. A flush of orders. A flush of orders. Be flush of money. Be flush of money. Face flush. Face flush. With a flush on one's face. With a flush on one's face. Plural vote. Plural vote. Plural voting. Plural voting. Plural society. Plural society. Plural offices. Plural offices. Plural marriage. Plural marriage. Plural wife. Plural wife. A plural form. A plural form. Experience firsthand. Experience firsthand. Firsthand information. Firsthand information. Firsthand investigation. Firsthand investigation. Firsthand vegetables. Firsthand vegetables. Firsthand goods. Firsthand goods. Learn something firsthand. Learn something firsthand. A firsthand account. A firsthand account. A firsthand report. A firsthand report. A firsthand description. A firsthand description. Direct experience. Direct experience. Firsthand experience. Firsthand experience. Firsthand data. Firsthand data. Secondhand information. Secondhand information. Secondhand knowledge. Secondhand knowledge. A secondhand car. A secondhand car. A secondhand bookstore. A secondhand bookstore. Secondhand furniture. Secondhand furniture. Buy something secondhand. Buy something secondhand. A heavy workload. A heavy workload. Carry a heavy workload. Carry a heavy workload. Revoke the privilege. Revoke the privilege. Parliamentary privilege. Parliamentary privilege. Special privilege of high rank. Special privilege of high rank. A breach of privilege. A breach of privilege. The privileges of birth. The privileges of birth. Water privilege. Water privilege. The privilege of citizenship. The privilege of citizenship. Privilege a person from some burden. Privilege a person from some burden. Give a privilege. Give a privilege. Sanctuary privilege. Sanctuary privilege. Exercise the privilege. Exercise the privilege. Have a privilege. Have a privilege. The privilege of equality. The privilege of equality. Have good ventilation. Have good ventilation. Through ventilation. Through ventilation.
A ventilation tower. A ventilation tower. A full ventilation of a problem. A full ventilation of a problem. The ventilation of one's grievances. The ventilation of one's grievances. Insufficient ventilation. Insufficient ventilation. A ventilation apparatus. A ventilation apparatus. A well-ventilated room. A well-ventilated room. Ventilate a room. Ventilate a room. Ventilate a grievance. Ventilate a grievance. Ventilate it in the press. Ventilate it in the press. Ventilate questions of policy. Ventilate questions of policy. Ventilate a complaint. Ventilate a complaint. Air vents. Air vents. Heating vents. Heating vents. Give vent to something. Give vent to something. Give full vent to something. Give full vent to something. Give vent to one's emotions. Give vent to one's emotions. Charter flight. Charter flight. The United Nations Charter. The United Nations Charter. A blackmailer's charter. A blackmailer's charter. A yacht available for charter. A yacht available for charter. The Great Charter. The Great Charter. The People's Charter. The People's Charter. Atlantic Charter. Atlantic Charter. Charter a bank. Charter a bank. Charter a bus. Charter a bus. Rent a bus. Rent a bus. An abundant harvest. An abundant harvest. Bear abundant fruit. Bear abundant fruit. Serve an abundant meal. Serve an abundant meal. Abundant funds. Abundant funds. Abundant reserves. Abundant reserves. Abound in color. Abound in color. Abound in products. Abound in products. Abound in courage. Abound in courage. Abound with rats. Abound with rats. A land of abundance. A land of abundance. A year of abundance. A year of abundance. Bread in abundance. Bread in abundance. And abundance of water power. And abundance of water power. Live in abundance. Live in abundance. Read the whereases in the will. Read the whereases in the will. Pest control. Pest control. Garden pests. Garden pests. Insect pests. Insect pests. A pest control officer. A pest control officer. To discharge a debt. To discharge a debt. Vaginal discharge. Vaginal discharge. To discharge your duties. To discharge your duties. A ban on the discharge of toxic waste. A ban on the discharge of toxic waste. Discharge a bow. Discharge a bow. Discharge an arrow from a bow. Discharge an arrow from a bow. Discharge ship. Discharge ship. Discharge a bankrupt. Discharge a bankrupt. Be discharge the service. Be discharge the service. Discharge one's duties. Discharge one's duties. The discharge of a gun. The discharge of a gun. A discharge of shots. A discharge of shots. A discharge valve. A discharge valve. A port of discharge. A port of discharge. An honorable discharge. An honorable discharge. Get one's discharge. Get one's discharge. The discharge of an obligation. The discharge of an obligation. The discharge of a bankrupt. The discharge of a bankrupt. The discharge of contract. The discharge of contract.
Discharge wastewater illegally. Discharge wastewater illegally. To die of starvation. To die of starvation. To die from starvation. To die from starvation. Be close to starvation. Be close to starvation. Suffer from starvation. Suffer from starvation. Live on starvation wages. Live on starvation wages. Starvation cure. Starvation cure. Fund starvation. Fund starvation. Die of self-starvation. Die of self-starvation. On the verge of starvation. On the verge of starvation. Supply starved rebels. Supply starved rebels. Starve to death. Starve to death. Starve a person. Starve a person. Starve a person to death. Starve a person to death. A crying jag. A crying jag. A jag of wheat. A jag of wheat. Jagged rocks. Jagged rocks. A jagged edge. A jagged edge. A jagged coastline. A jagged coastline. Jagged mountains. Jagged mountains. 5 multiplied by 3 is 15. 5 multiplied by 3 is 15. Multiply 5 by 3. Multiply 5 by 3. Multiply 5 into 3. Multiply 5 into 3. Multiply instances. Multiply instances. Germs multiply. Germs multiply. Multiply 10 times. Multiply 10 times. Multiply evidence. Multiply evidence. A multitude of birds. A multitude of birds. A multitude of friends. A multitude of friends. A multitude of cares. A multitude of cares. A multitude of possibilities. A multitude of possibilities. As the stars in multitude. As the stars in multitude. The uneducated multitude. The uneducated multitude. Amid cheerful multitudes. Amid cheerful multitudes. In great multitude. In great multitude. Multiple choice. Multiple choice. A multiple pileup. A multiple pileup. Multiple copies of documents. Multiple copies of documents. A multiple entry visa. A multiple entry visa. To suffer multiple injuries. To suffer multiple injuries. 12 is a multiple of 3. 12 is a multiple of 3. A common multiple. A common multiple. The least common multiple. The least common multiple. The lowest common multiple. The lowest common multiple. A multiple tax. A multiple tax. Multiplicity of claims. Multiplicity of claims. Maximum multiplicity. Maximum multiplicity. Sneak preview. Sneak preview. A VIP preview. A VIP preview. Give a preview. Give a preview. Press preview. Press preview. Preview and review thoroughly. Preview and review thoroughly. A preview party. A preview party. Preside at the piano. Preside at the piano.
Preside over a ceremony. Preside over a ceremony. Preside at a ceremony. Preside at a ceremony. Preside over an examination. Preside over an examination. Preside at a trial. Preside at a trial. Preside over a meeting. Preside over a meeting. The presiding judge. The presiding judge. Preside at a family dinner. Preside at a family dinner. Race prejudice. Race prejudice. Have a prejudice. Have a prejudice. A victim of racial prejudice. A victim of racial prejudice. Eliminate racial prejudice. Eliminate racial prejudice. Cast away a prejudice. Cast away a prejudice. Win free from prejudice. Win free from prejudice. Be swayed by prejudice. Be swayed by prejudice. Prejudice one's chances of success. Prejudice one's chances of success. Color prejudice. Color prejudice. Prevail against overwhelming odds. Prevail against overwhelming odds. Prevail against wrong. Prevail against wrong. Prevail in a struggle. Prevail in a struggle. Prevail on government. Prevail on government. A prevalent view. A prevalent view. A prevalent fashion. A prevalent fashion. Prevalent habits. Prevalent habits. Gambling is prevalent. Gambling is prevalent. A prevalent belief. A prevalent belief. Universally prevalent. Universally prevalent. Prepare a preface. Prepare a preface. A preface to a book. A preface to a book. Write a preface to a book. Write a preface to a book. The preface to World War. The preface to World War.